So what's the deal with Pickpocket in Neverwinter Nights? That's what we're going to explore in this Neverwinter Nights Tactica, looking at it from the perspective of playing both a rogue, stealth-based class, but also opening up the possibility to playing it with any other class. What about a fighter, a sorcerer, or a pickpocket wizard? Now, one of the things about Neverwinter Nights is that it's built on the D&D 3.x gaming engine. What this means is essentially you have to beat a certain number to do something. We've got the dialogue options, we've got the cool animation text, we've got the spell effects and the graphics, but can you beat that DC, that difficulty check? And if you've played modern D&D, you can understand this system of rolling a d20 and having to equal or beat a number. This was the genesis. This is where it all started. Dungeons & Dragons 3.0, 3.5, and the merging of the two, 3.x. So in Neverwinter Nights, we do have character classes. And the idea behind a character class is essentially it's a window dressing. And how much tax do you want to play in terms of feats and skill points to open up certain options? Now, yes, you have divine spells and arcane spells that are not available outside of those character classes. You do have something interesting like UMD, Use Magic Device, which if high enough as a rogue or as a bard, lets you utilize non-class items. So essentially you could burn some scrolls and cast some different spells, which gets very, very interesting. On a side note, especially at the higher levels where if you're playing a wizard or even a sorcerer with spell casts, if you have the gold, which eventually at that level gold is everywhere in Neverwinter Nights, you can buy stacks of these scrolls and combined with stealth and other rogue/bard effects, cast off some very, very interesting stuff at a very, very high level. But with that, this idea of certain classes allow you to level up your points, your skill points, 1-to-1, or sometimes 2-to-1. And likewise, certain feats are available for certain classes, and certain classes get certain feats for free. So this idea of playing a pickpocket and the skill itself. I won't give away any spoilers, but pickpocket is interesting because as a rogue or a bard, you've got the high intelligence or the good intelligence. You've got the highest skill points in the game. Wizards have high skill points, but they do that not only from the initial start, but also the bonus based on raw intelligence. And you're going to be jacking up your intelligence because that's going to be the DC check as a wizard, intelligence for opposing monsters and encounters to beat your spells or to resist them, and in some ways, the damage that you can put out. That gives you a lot of skill points. The rogue and the bard have it based on the character class. So dumping a few skill points into pickpocket, you can do that without suffering any serious skill deficiencies elsewhere. Now, the choice of bluff, intimidate, persuade. Personally, I take persuasion. You don't necessarily have to be in all three, but you can diversify with that. Of course, stealth, hide in shadows and move silently. You're going to jack those up. Maybe some lore. You have enough. As soon as you move outside of the rogue/shadow dancer, well, that's prestige classes, or the bard, now you're paying the class tax. You're not going 1-to-1. You're going to have to pay 2 points. And if you're playing a character class that is not based on intelligence, then you are taking away even less skill points that you have for other, perhaps more critical areas. Now, when we get into feats, Pickpocket is boosted by Dexterity. It naturally wants to pair with a bard or a rogue because as you level up and put points into Dexterity, especially if you're playing a rogue, that's like a free bump every single time that you get a bonus in those skill checks. Feats. You can burn some feats that are going to give you additional pickpocket skills and abilities. But the question here is, you are burning those feats instead of investing in other feats that your character class might need. So what we see, of course, is, yes, truly, any character class can develop pickpocket, but it is favored by those two classes. Well, Fritz, I'm playing a rogue, and I'm playing a sorcerer, and I'm going to jack up the DC. I'm not really worried about persuade because, well, I'll get that on the charisma boosts and maybe some gear. I'm not really worried about spellcraft because I played the game so many times and I know what they're going to cast, and I just don't have the dexterity for counterspell or the diversity of counterspell by playing a sorcerer. Meta magic, I'm only going to take one to boost the DC damage. I can get behind the rest. So look, I've got some skill points freed up. Let's take some pickpocket. This leads to the question that we see in every role-playing game, whether it's Baldur's Gate, Skyrim, Neverwinter Nights. Is there anything to pickpocket, and what are the consequences? Well, the first thing, of course, with the pickpocket, this being a DC-based system where you've got to beat a certain number based off on a D20, you could still roll a 1. You could still roll really, really low. But generally speaking, the base difficulty to pickpocket is pretty high. Then on top of that, it's the modified awareness of the target. So the DCs get up pretty high. What this means is you're going to need an above average or a really, really solid pickpocket skill just to attempt to pull that off. I could fail, reload, fail, reload, fail, reload, fail, reload. I could get a natural 20 and get it. But this idea of level 1, 2, or 3, or 4 rogue, I'm in the early mission here, clearing out the different districts in Neverwinter City, and it's not going to happen. It is not going to happen. You're not going to be running around pickpocketing everything. It requires a significant investment. And then, of course, no spoilers. What are the targets? Now, I see that as kind of a role-playing-esque possibility. You can kind of get an idea of maybe some things to pickpocket. There are, no spoilers, a few okay items in the base game and the expansions. But where pickpocket really comes in is what the Neverwinter Nights engine was intended to do. It's intended to create modules, to share different D&D ideas. Forget replayability. I don't need to replay the same module again and again, although maybe twice or 3 times just to make sure I've seen everything. With that in mind, certain modules might be geared towards pickpocket, even the narrative of it being part of a thieves guild or a bard's guild, or the fact that things have been hard-coded into that module to allow you to pickpocket. Unfortunately, if we're playing the meta, playing a rogue or a bard, I have so many skill points that I can pay for pickpocket, and I'm not paying that cross-class tax. But playing any other character class out there, and I've tried it, and I've experimented with it, it takes away from other skills, which even if I'm willing to brute force it and put that aside, you just really can't generate enough alpha to be able to justify it, to get those levels high enough. We're not talking about, I want to play an armored spell sword kind of battle mage, so I'm going to pay the tax, and I'm not going to dip 1 level into fighter, because I'm a purist. I want pure 40 on my Wizzy. I'm going to pay the tax and go for medium and heavy armor. I'm burning 2 feats just to get that, where the fighter gets those feats for free at level 1. And on top of that, I've got arcane spell failure. All right, I can boost some other meta magic, and let's be honest, at the lower levels, those spells aren't really worth casting. That tax that I pay for those feats, because it's outside of my character class, I can do. I can roll with that. It's not optimal, but I can make it work. Pickpocket, you could make it work if you're willing to pay the tax, but there's really not enough, in my opinion, agree or disagree, targets to go around actually pickpocketing and actually being successful. Save those for the modules that focus on pickpocketing written into the game engine itself.